Over to the Spiritual Broadcast Network. It's the go-to place for all things spiritual. You'll discover internet television shows that you won't find anywhere else. You can also choose from hundreds of hours of spiritual documentaries and movies. You'll enjoy on-demand and live internet television programming 24/7. Best of all, we add new dramas, comedies, talk, and reality shows and more on a daily basis. So why spend countless hours searching the web when you can quickly find just what you want on the Spiritual Broadcast Network? Yeah, there, now we got it.
Okay.
It was. Are you able to hear me, Rakesh?
Yes, I am.
Well, you know what, we had, I don't know, first time that ever happened, we had an audio problem, so I've been kind of mouthing the words. I don't think anybody was hearing anything. Evidently you weren't. Let me introduce you again, Rakesh. I've got Rakesh Sethi on the phone. He's written a book called Cruising Through Turbulence, a really relevant book anytime, really, but especially during these times. I think times like we're having now make people maybe a little bit more willing to talk about the topics you have here. It's an inspirational guide for your wealth and well-being in difficult and economic times and beyond. So before we get into the book, Sethi, I want to talk about you. You know, my viewers really like to know something about the author. Where were you? Where are you? Were you born in another country and you're here, or were you born here? What kind of a home life were you raised in?
George, thank you very much, first of all, having me as a guest on your show.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Appreciate it. I was born in India about 30 plus years ago. I migrated to the United States and finished my pre-med, and I was very much interested in medicine at that time. However, as cards may have it, I finished my engineering as well and got hired by Hewlett-Packard, so I was very fortunate to have a start of a good life after coming over here, and subsequently the interest in medicine propped up again, and I went into the natural medicine, which is holistic medicine for both body and mind, and that sort of brought me to a point which perhaps we could discuss later, what led me to actually write this book, even though I'm a holistic medicine practitioner.
Well, one of the questions I was definitely going to ask you was, what was the motive? What brought you to writing this book? That's quite a background. You were in pre-med, and then what did you do for Hewlett Packard?
I started off in the labs as an engineer, but I knew my talent was not as sharp compared to other engineers, but I would talk a lot more, so they put me in marketing and sales.
Aha.
So most of my career with HP was selling and training people and so forth. So I had most of the eastern seaboard as my territory, covering from west here, from Cupertino to be exact. So I had a fairly good opportunities to actually travel through United States during my time with Hewlett Packard.
So would you see yourself as being, when I read your book and what you're talking about here, I see a pretty nice meld between left and right brain. Is that, because it's kind of right brain to get it when you get into the spiritual part of this, I think, more than left brain. How do you see yourself with that?
I really sort of surprised that you caught it so quickly. Being an engineer, yes, of course, I am very much a left brain, and my desire to get into spirituality arose back in late 80s, and one of the books, by the way, that I was very much interested was written by Fritz Capra. He's an Austrian-born physicist who was a professor in UC Berkeley.
The Dancing Woolley Master?
No, it was the Dow of Physics.
Oh, yeah, okay, right. Great book.
Yes, it's a great book, very dry book. If you're not a physicist, you probably wouldn't enjoy it, but physics was one of my favorite subjects, so I was pretty much into, taking the logic as far as you can go and then take a leap of faith from there to see what it is. And that's what essentially Fritz Capra did. He essentially looked at, he said, well, what are physicists trying to answer in particle physics? And what are mystics trying to answer about our existence? And he sort of came with a parallelism between the two approaches, and I couldn't agree with him more on that particular line of thinking. And that's essentially what sort of brought me to a spiritual line of thinking, with both in a balance, both sort of the right side, having the faith, but taking you up to that point with some logic. So there is some reasoning behind it where you are on a solid ground, and then from there you take a leap of faith, as opposed to just, sort of jumping into it. And this is what I actually tell my clients and whoever follows me, that here I am only to share with you and open your mind and give you the questions to ask yourself, and don't just accept my answers. If you like my answers, try them, explore them, and then let them become your own. Otherwise, it is just a borrowed knowledge. You
right.
want knowledge your own.
Well, Capra, I read that book by Capra. Although I was far from being a physicist, I had been in the spiritual part of it, and it just all resonated with me from the opposite place that that I came from, and I searched like you, but I came into it from the other angle, ending up the same place, I think.
Excellent. So it just shows that the convergence is there.
Absolutely, without question. And I think at some point, it's great to be up in the mind, in the mental, in that spiritual, but we also need to stay grounded, don't we?
Absolutely, absolutely. In fact, what happens is often, George, we are often uplifted up in the quote-unquote air and space level, if you will. That's my Ayurvedic medicine speaking.
Uh-huh.
Because there are 5 elements in Ayurveda, which is earth, water, fire, air, and space. And air and space elements are very lofty elements. These are the elements where most of the spirituality, creativity, and all of those things exist. And people connect with those elements rather quickly, and they're very comforting. However, moment you leave your teacher or your motivator or a guru, you're back to the ground level.
Right.
Because you never rose to that level by building your own building, if you will. And that is what I often try to talk about, and I have attempted, it may be a feeble attempt, but I have attempted in my book, Cruising Through Turbulence, where I have tried to say, okay, you start at a certain level, and you figure out from there, and then you start your journey, and then you reach up to this level where it is more subtle, just like the air and space elements are more subtle than the earth and water element as you go up. And the same thing with the subtle intellect and spirituality. As you move away from the gross existence to the existence in spiritual world, you are in the most subtle world of existence.
Absolutely. Well, one of the things you do in your book is you really talk about some pretty esoteric kinds of things, Maya, and that. But you bring it down into a really a very practical level where someone who is really just embarking on this kind of a journey can benefit, and someone who's been around the esoteric, metaphysical kind of thinking is also going to be able to make that connection. So you really kind of walked a pretty nice middle road with what you've written here. Well, before we get into the book, where can they go to purchase your book? Are you selling it at your own website, or is it just Amazon? And
it's available on both of those. The website is truewellnessgroup.com, and you can also go to Amazon and find it there as well.
All right, so let's get in and let's get into your book here a little bit. Really, the topic that you have. Most people have two topics that they don't want to talk about openly, that they hide, that they really have a hard time getting honest about, and that's their money life, how they what's really going on, and their sex life. Both of those things people find very, very difficult. So you've taken on quite a subject here. You talk about early on anger, depression, anxiety, and fear. How do those play into this at this point?
Well, if we look at our material attachments, it's the good old principle of attachment. Whatever we attach with, and we spend significant amount of our time and our efforts with, we tend to develop, we sort of become result-oriented, if you will, with that particular element. In this case, it's material wealth. And if you gain material wealth with your actions, you're happy. But if with your actions you didn't gain, or the worst case, you lost your material wealth, you will become unhappy. And with that comes anxiety, because the law, especially in the current economic times or any crisis, when you lose something, your anxiety level goes up. When anxiety goes up, and if it goes a little bit more, depending upon actually your mind-body constitution, it turns into fear. And then it sort of just raises havoc in your mind, and you lose all your balance. And that balance also makes you lose perspective on many other things, aspects of your life. So it's sort of like a trigger point, if you will.
Right.
So if you are attached with something very, very much, and something happens to it, it triggers very many other events in your life.
So, well, yeah, not only that, but if we get this fear and this anxiety and this anger and all that stuff going on, we lose any kind of connection we have with that higher source, higher power, whatever you might want to call it, with that connection, with that more etheric space you were talking about.
Absolutely. Most people, frankly, as I have come across, and not much surprising, frankly, live in the quote-unquote lower gross levels of our existence.
Right.
And those levels are very much attached with the outside world, the material world. And people who have not developed their inner world, they are very vulnerable to anything happening to the outside world. As soon as there is some sort of a shake-up in the outside world, they feel it, they sense it. It goes right through their spine. Whereas if people have developed their inner world and they have a strong sense of being, their own self, their happiness and their existence all of a sudden is riding on two pillars here. One is the material wealth, and the other one, which I have referred to in my book as a non-material wealth. And if something happens to one, the other one is there to cushion you through the crisis.
Right. Well, one thing for sure is to be able to bring ourselves to a place where we can kind of meet all of these stressful kind of things that life offers us with at least a modicum of serenity and some peace of mind. Because without that, all the stuff in the world is not going to make you happy.
Absolutely. Oh, absolutely. And the good thing about this is it is not like one a drink that I can make and I give it to everybody and everybody just gets to that state. It just doesn't happen that way, because each one of us is so unique in our constitution, in our physical constitution, mental constitution, and as well as spiritual constitution. So as we get to learn more about our own constitution, like what sets us off and what makes us feel good, we ask these tough questions and evaluate ourselves. Then as we read through any book, my book or any other book on this very subject, you try to resonate and you try to pick up things that bring you to that point that you just spoke of.
So do you think that so many, maybe the majority of people really have to have some kind of difficulty, some kind of a problem, hit some kind of a brick wall before they're willing to really stop for a minute and take a look at these issues that you bring up and begin to get a new viewpoint on all this?
I think most of the time it is that way, unless you are one of those gifted ones who have an affinity for this stuff right from your birth.
Right.
See, we are sort of like a born in a material world, like a kid in a candy store.
Boy, that's for sure.
We have entered into this, and there is so much of it, and everything is so attractive and tempting, and you just sort of go into it, and somewhere down the road, you have lost the way out of it, because you're so much caught up with all of these things, and until something goes wrong. And by the way, I feel like all of this is a nature's plan. I believe in that. And just like the economic cycles sort of come and go, and when the bad economic cycle or difficult economic cycle hits, and if it hits, some of us or majority of us, the idea really there is the nature is prompting you to jump to the next level.
So what I'm basically hearing you say then is that there is some kind of an afterlife, and that we are getting prepared for that. Is that what you're alluding to?
Oh, actually, I was staying only in this life with this comment.
Well, when you say that nature has, this kind of everything is in perfect order, what difference would it really make if somebody stayed in this lower level their whole life, or they got into, or they move into that next level? Is it just really a comfort? Is that what you're talking about?
Oh, okay. Well, there's the two-part answer to that. One, I wanted to answer to your first comment that, yeah, there is some event that happens in person's life to sort of inspires them or forces them to look within, to make some changes and move towards the higher level, and that event sort of transpires that journey. And that is, of course, within this life. Now, if we were to broaden this in stretch the timeline to eons and eons, of course, there are births in which we learn and we move forward, and there are births where we don't learn anything and we sort of stay stuck in where we are and we didn't learn any lesson. And the nature has a way of giving you opportunity to learn again.
Right. So, how old were you when you came here from India?
I was at that time 19, 18. Just turned 18.
So you had the Eastern background as far as spirituality. That's what you were raised in.
Absolutely, George. I grew up on stories. Some of the stories that I have shared in my book.
Right.
These stories really sort of resonate at first. They just sound very intriguing to a young mind. It's basically a clever story that sort of, is entertaining, if you will. But as you grow older and you start to reflect upon those things, it just shifts something in you, and it starts to question. It starts to make you, look beyond the stories. The whole idea of being a human, in my mind, and that is a very big difference between a human and an animal, is a human has this power of reflection, power of reasoning. And if we do not do that, then we might as well be living like a cow.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I have to tell you that the Eastern understandings and philosophy really struck an accord with me back, with Maharishi Mahat Yoga and the autobiography of Yogi, and I mean, it just, in my mind, it really saved my life when I started to connect these two. I'm at a place where it feels like the real thing we need to do is to come to a place where East meets West.
Oh, absolutely. When I meet with my clients, typically in my larger speaking engagements, I hardly touch spirituality. However, when I'm meeting with my clients one-on-one, if the client is interested in that, I often find that that interest and the connection, and there is overlap. And the reason for that really is I sort of look at it in this way, East or West, it makes no difference, because the equipment that we all are living with, if you want to call it body, mind, intellect, and spiritual self, if you look at all that, it is the same.
Yes.
It's resonating in every one of us. And the inherent desire for a human being to know more, which is higher than himself, it's in all of us. It's just that some of us have more intense in us, and the other ones are just at the beginning.
Right. Well, one of the things that I, as I observe India, India for for centuries was highly spiritual. That was the track, and little attention, or at least less attention, was paid to the material, and there was a great deal of poverty. And then in the West, we, like we were, I guess, I don't think we were, following the same kind of spiritual track. A lot of material wealth, and then that kind of brought its unhappiness together. And somehow or other, what seems to be going on today is when I look at India and the changes that are taking place there, and the changes that are taking place here, are kind of seemingly they're bringing us to a melding of the two, because that balance seems to be throughout the whole universe really one of the essential places that we have to get to.
I totally agree with you. The middle class in India is growing rapidly. It's just when you look at the global economy, it's just the economic formulas work in this favor, where the labor is cheap and the talent is there, and it's an English-speaking country for the most part. It is very attractive for Western companies to go there and create business and grow business and establish their, companies there, and that is leading people into middle class with a lot of material growth, and people who have been sort of living with quote unquote more spiritual knowledge to be happy. And as I go into my book into this particular subject, that your formula of happiness is happiness equals material wealth plus non-material wealth.
Right.
And material wealth, when it is less, the non-material wealth rises up to compensate for it, and you still become happy. On the other side, if you have very much all material wealth and very little spiritual wealth, for whatever reasons, the material wealth, as it increases, doesn't necessarily increases the happiness or compensates for the lack of spiritual wealth.
It could actually do the opposite, can't it?
Absolutely. It does, in fact, do the opposite. And you could probably see the life of some rich and famous people who had plenty of wealth, but they ended up taking up their own life because they were just not happy with what they had.
Right. They were miserable and something was missing. Well, you talk about in your book, you talk about there's power in material wealth. Tell our audience what you mean by that.
The power in material wealth is so much that it can captivate all of your five senses, if you will. And those five senses are connected to your emotional self, to your mind. Mind you, they're not connected with your intellect. Intellect is separate from this. And the power, once it gets hold of your five senses, and the five senses in turn get your emotions engaged with the material, and if you're not careful, you can get swept away, and at that point, intellect can do nothing for you. It is sort of like being in a raging water where you got swept away, and your anchor, in this example, which I'm saying intellect, is too weak to do anything to get you out of this raging water that you are sort of going along with. And the only way that you could come out of this would be to, like you said, something desperate or something has to happen that makes you stop and then forces you to grow your subtle intellect or intellect, to take a look at, to re-inventory your life, essentially, and reorganize your priorities, so to speak. And that's what I mean by one has to be careful about this power of or the attraction and the power in the material wealth, in the nature of material wealth, that it can easily let you lose your self-control.
So basically, what we're talking about, or what's at least close to what we're talking about, is this power in material wealth can really lead to addiction.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And one of the things in the book that I mention is you have to take your inventory, as I mentioned, that you do self-evaluation. And
Right.
You have to take your inventory of yourself, and each one of us has weaknesses for different things. And the self-control, a person asked me, what is self-control? Well, self-control is not like if I have no affinity for smoking and I never smoke, I don't have desire to smoke. And I say, oh, I have a very good self-control over me on smoking. And that's a false statement.
Right.
Because I don't have desire to smoke. I don't have weakness for smoking. So self-control doesn't even enter the equation. The self-control only enters after you have recognized what is your weakness. And then you say, okay, now how do I control myself? And one of the things in my book I talk about is it is too late to control yourself once you have put yourself in front of your weakness. So if you have a weakness for alcohol and you put yourself in front of it, the reason it is your weakness is because alcohol has a strong hold over you and your intellect has no strength in fighting back. The only time you have any chance of fighting back and having any control is not to put yourself in front of your weaknesses. So never challenge your weaknesses. Never think that you have a strength or you're a strong person to challenge your weakness. Never do that.
I've heard it said that if you go into the barber shop long enough and often enough, sooner or later you're getting a haircut.
Very true.
Same kind of story. So let's talk a bit about attachment and what that really means, and because that's a very powerful. Because it's the attachment that really catches us here, isn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely. Attachment is such that becomes a source of, on one hand, happiness, on the other hand, unhappiness, and the attachment to. Let me actually step back a little bit and clarify what I mean by attachment.
Yes.
In attachment, if I am attached to my work, that is an attachment or a passion that I bring to what I am doing, the activity. That is a different kind of attachment. But if I attach myself to the result of my work, that is an absolutely different kind of attachment, because that attachment takes you into sadness if the result is not good. That attachment takes you into being delirious, or you might think that, my gosh, you are the best person born since the beginning of this earth because you are producing results. And it creates a sense of a proudness in which that takes you to, again, to the higher levels where if tomorrow you fail, you will fall right to the ground. So that is the kind of attachment that I'm speaking of, which is the attachment to the results of it, of your actions, if you will.
So in other words, it's kind of like, be a part of the journey and make that your goal and your instead of the arrival.
Absolutely, absolutely. Your journey, your work, that is your reward.
Right.
Frankly. The result of the journey or your work is not really your reward. If that's what you thought your reward was, my gosh, think about it. You maybe worked all year long to produce some results, and you produced the result, and after producing that result, let's say you had just a gangster of a really happy, joyful party that maybe lasted 24 hours. And then you spent 364 days times 24 hours in working towards that result. But if you only lived for that result, of course, now you have those 24 hours, and now they're over. And with that philosophy, now you're jumping on to the next journey, which again you're going to wait a long time before the result comes, and when it does come, you better hope that it's the right one. If it didn't, you will have no fun.
Absolutely. Well, I'm pretty convinced at this point that my job as a human being is to do everything that I need to do to bring myself to a state of joy. Because when I'm doing things that are right for me spiritually and just all the way around, I experience joy. And so I also tend to spread that around with the people who are around me.
Absolutely. And this is the contagious part of this. When we start to live with this knowledge, I don't have to speak in any words. My actions speak louder than words. The joy comes even when I am going through challenging times, because I look at the challenging times as the times that are helping me grow into something different than I wasn't there before. I don't look at the challenging times as something that nature has put in front of me to hurt me, to sabotage me, because your attitude shifts. You don't look at in this direction. Your capacity for shifting yourself and letting go of the negative also comes along with having well-developed and strong spiritual self.
So this thing we were talking about just a second ago also was, I think you talk about it as being the if-then trap, don't you?
Oh yes.
If you know, if I get this, I'm going to be great, and that just goes on and on and on and on.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you work all year long, or a month long, or a week long, or however long it is, to produce your results, and you go, well, if I get this, if I get that, I will be happy. And then after you reach there, you enjoy the moment of happiness, and it's very fleeting because it's a temporary state. And then all of a sudden, the next demand from your mind is already queued up, and you are now going after that. And then next thing you know, you are caught in that if and then again. If I now get this, I will be happy. So we live in this model of if and then, and this if and then model never ends, and we go through life with this formula, living unhappy.
Absolutely.
For the most part of our life.
Well, you know, one of your in one of your chapters, you talk about when is enough wealth enough.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about that a bit, because you know I see that. Gosh, we can certainly see it in our political system today with the amount of billionaires that are, you know, in there trying to, you know, force their will around. That they just, you know, it's just the money keeps flowing once it starts to flow, and there just doesn't seem to be enough.
That's right. This is the part where, as I was mentioning, the self-control.
Right.
The greed has taken over, and you have absolutely lost your self-control over the whole process of wealth creation and wealth enjoyment. I often cite an example of, I don't know, you don't see many loose dogs on the streets in the United States, but in India there are plenty. And these dogs, as soon as the car turns around the corner and comes onto the street, some of the dogs will just go chasing after the car, barking like crazy, and run. And one day, interestingly enough, the car stopped. And the dog didn't know what to do with it. You see?
Yep.
That is the state of human mind.
I caught the car. Now where do I go with it? Right?
That's right. Human mind is so much caught up in you can say becoming a millionaire and then billionaire and then multi-billionaire, And if you're living with such a philosophy, and one day when everything stops in your life, and you look at it and you go, well, where am I? What did I do? Did I really want to get here?
I think that happens a lot.
Yeah.
A lot of people do. Is this all there is? Has been kind of summed up. Well, do you think that it's our culture here in the States that kind of breeds that? In other words, we really place our personal well, I lost the word. Our personal
Worth.
being worth. That's exactly. Yeah. Thank you. Our personal worth on how much we have, which is a real shallow road that just ends up in disaster most of the time.
Absolutely. Now, let's look at that actually. When we start to measure our personal worth with our material worth, what we have, there is no end to the material worth, because there's always somebody else who has more than you.
Absolutely.
So if you are measuring your personal worth on that scale, and you are on that scale, it is virtually impossible for you to measure your personal worth and come out ahead.
Yeah, it was kind of like being the fastest gun in the West. Sooner or later, somebody's going to shoot you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, at the point actually I get into the book with that is that when you reach, when enough is enough, you reach certain point and you start to question, is that all there is? And I have reached that. That's the time you start to put on a different scale on which you start to measure yourself. And if that happens to you, don't let, as you were mentioning, George, cultural values from outside, stop your natural progression. This is a natural progression in each one of us. And as you had mentioned, what is the difference between the Eastern and the Western culture? The Western culture, even though the inside voice may come to a Western mind, that is that all there is, they get so much attracted, and the power of the outside world, material world, is so great that that inner voice is drowned. But when you're living in the Eastern culture, and it may not be so now, because there is a lot of material wealth growth in India, for example.
Right.
That it may still drown your inner voice when it happens, because it does happen. It is a natural progression that takes place, and there is a section in that in my book, which is basically says change or perish. So if that inner voice comes in you and you don't make the change, that becomes almost like a turning point for you. All the progress that you did up until that point, and the nature brought you with your efforts at that point, and now the inner voice came within you to put you on a separate measuring track or a scale, but you refused. And if you did, that becomes a turning point, and from there you will only fall down, even though you might make many more material strides. But inside something had shifted, but you didn't take advantage of it.
Well, one of the interesting things about that idea and that statement, you said a really important statement, change or perish. That really goes back to evolution and Darwin. And we've had it confused that only the strong survive, but the reality is only the adaptable survive.
Absolutely.
And those who are willing to make changes.
Absolutely. And especially in the case of human beings, the adaptation really comes not from the emotional level, it really comes from the intellectual level. And then the intellectual level is further, as you will read my book, I have divided into two parts, which is the gross intellect, which is involved with the gross part of the world, outside world, and the subtle intellect, which is really involved with the subtle truths in the nature and the subtle part of your existence. And if you develop that side of you and strengthen that side of you, you will become adaptable. As the nature changes outside, you will have capacity to change yourself to make the best of what is being offered in front of you from the outside. You have no control over the outside. The only control you have is within, how you react to the changes that are going on outside. And what you just said, if you're adaptable to that, you will survive.
Absolutely. You know, you have an interesting statement that you make. You say that happiness is, or addiction to happiness is by birth, and addiction to wealth is learnt. I hadn't thought about it in those terms, but that's absolutely a true statement.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, it's quite an insight. Excuse me. So we have a short time left. By the way, let me talk about your book a little bit again. I really recommend you pick this up. Not only does it talk about the issue or the difficulty, but it also points the way off of this wheel, off of this up and down. Gee, I'm happy today and I'm sad tomorrow, and I'm happy today, I'm sad tomorrow, where things can level out for you somewhat. If you're caught in this kind of a trap, boy, there's an awful lot of people who are being forced into seeing that they are caught in this trap in these days.
Absolutely. And George, the amazing thing is that we, living in the United States, practically have so much more than many other people living in the other parts of the world. And in my mind, there is no reason for majority of us living here to not be on that cycle. What is the benefit of having so much material if you cannot get off that wheel and enjoy the higher level of existence, so that not only you enjoy the material side, and that I make that very clear in my book, that you are in material existence, you need material. You even need beyond basic material, even the comforts that are available here. But once you have those, you need to take, especially if your inner voice is coming within you and prompting you, hey, I think I have had enough, and now I need to just cruise with what I have, enjoy what I have, and then also grow myself in some other parts of my existence, so that at the end of the day, as you mentioned, I am no longer just dependent on one wheel. I have another wheel, which is my non-material wealth, that is also I am riding. And when shock absorber on one breaks down, the other one takes and cushions my ride, basically.
Absolutely. Well, I'll tell you what, Rakesh, we've run out of time here. We've got a couple of minutes left, and what I'd like to do, there was a lot more I wanted to get into with you, especially the idea that what was once considered a luxury somehow or other becomes a necessity, and that whole thing was a whole different way of seeing how we kind of build ourselves into luxury, which probably isn't really. But to find out more about that, you're going to have to buy the book, so definitely do that. But is there anything in this last couple of minutes that we haven't covered that you would really like to talk about?
Well, one thing I would like to mention is not just from the material perspective and on the other end, a spiritual perspective. Being an Ayurvedic practitioner, it is my passion to inspire people to keep both emotionally and physically well. And both when you are emotionally and physically available in in this house, what we call our body, only then you can make a progress, whether you want to make a progress in the material world or whether you want to make a progress in the non-material world. The idea really is to keep yourself healthy, and not just healthy in the physical body, but also in the mental body. And that's what I really try to also convey with this book, which actually goes beyond just emotional well-being, also self-development in the spiritual end of things that can make you much more a wholesome being, if you will. So it will not only just help you spiritually, but I feel it will also help you stay healthy in your physical existence as well.
Absolutely. Rakesh, I have thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. You are a good guy, and your book is well worth reading. I really recommend that you pick up a copy, Cruising Through Turbulence, and we all get our time in turbulence without question. So thank you, and you have a good week, and I look forward to you get down here in Sarasota, Florida at some point. Come and look me up. We'll have some coffee together.
George, my pleasure, and I thank you very much for your time, and I thank you very much all the listeners who have given their time, and I hope maybe someday in the future we'll share some thoughts again.
I look forward to that. You have a good night.
Be well. Good night.
You too. Okay, well, another went blank time. Oh, there we go. We had another great show, a great guest. It's really a good read. If you're suffering from some of this that we talked about tonight, check this book out. It'll help you tremendously. So next week I have another great guest, and in the meantime, don't forget to accentuate the positive and have a fantastic week. Be sure to hop on over to the Spiritual Broadcast Network. It's the go-to place for all things spiritual. You'll discover internet television shows that you won't find anywhere else. You can also choose from hundreds of hours of spiritual documentaries and movies. You'll enjoy on-demand and live internet television programming 24/7. Best of all, we add new dramas, comedies, talk, and reality shows and more on a daily basis. So why spend countless hours searching the web when you can quickly find just what you want on the Spiritual Broadcast Network?